Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to go my review of WCW Slamboree 1997. Starting off the evening, we'll go to our first match of the night. It is for the WCW Television Championship. It is Ultimo Dragon versus Steven Regal. Number one, I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between the Dragon and Regal, with Regal keeping the pace of the match. Dragon then lands multiple kicks on Regal. Ono then attacks Regal ringside. Dragon then hits a Hurricane Rana off the top rope on Regal. Dragon then hits a springboard moonsault on Regal as well. Regal then applies his signature Regal stretch. And your winner of the match by submission, and at that time, new television champion, is Steven Regal. Hats off to Steven Regal for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Luna Vachon versus Medusa. I thought this was an okay matchup. Back and forth matchup between Vachon and Medusa, with Luna Vachon keeping the pace of the match. But Medusa ultimately hits a German suplex on Luna Vachon, pins her for the 3, and your winner of the match is Medusa. Hats off to Medusa for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Yuji Yasuroka versus Rey Mysterio. I thought this was a good matchup. Back and forth matchup between Mysterio and Yasuroka, with Mysterio keeping the pace of the match. Mysterio then hits a senton to the outside. Mysterio then ultimately hits the finish on Yasuroka, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Rey Mysterio Jr. Hats off to Rey Mysterio Jr. for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Glacier versus Mortis. I thought this was a good matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Glacier and Mortis, with Mortis keeping the pace of the match. Wrath makes his way down to the ring. Wrath then attacks Glacier, and your winner of the match by disqualification is Glacier. Hats off to Glacier for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Jeff Jarrett versus Dean Malenko for the WCW United States Championship. I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Jarrett and Malenko, with Malenko keeping the pace of the match. Jarrett then applies a figure 4 leg lock on Malenko, but Malenko quickly breaks the hold. McMichael makes his way out to the ring. Malenko then applies a Texas Cloverleaf on Jarrett, and your winner of the match by submission is Dean Malenko. Hats off to Dean Malenko for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Ming versus Chris Benoit. I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Ming and Benoit, with Ming keeping the pace of the match. Jacqueline makes her way out to the ring. Benoit then goes for a diving headbutt, but Ming counters it with a Tonga death grip on Benoit. And your winner of the match is Ming. Hats off to Ming for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a tag team matchup. It is Conan teaming up with Hugh Morris versus the Steiners. I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with the Steiners keeping the pace of the match. Scott Steiner ends up hitting an overhead belly-to-belly suplex on Conan. Morris then hits a press slam on Scott Steiner. Conan then lands a rolling lariat on Scott Steiner in the middle of the ring. Rick then lands a bulldog on Hugh Morris, but Scott Steiner ultimately hits a Frankensteiner on Hugh Morris. Pins for the 3. And your winners of the match are the Steiner brothers. Hats off to the Steiners for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Reggie White versus Steve McMichael. I thought this was a good matchup as well. Back and forth matchup between Reggie White and McMichael, with Reggie White keeping the pace of the match. Jarrett then throws McMichael the briefcase. McMichael then hits Reggie White with the briefcase, pins for the 3. And your winner of the match is Steve McMichael. Hats off to Steve McMichael for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of WCW Slamboree 1997. It is Roddy Piper teaming up with Ric Flair and Kevin Green versus Nash, Syxx, and Scott Hall. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between both teams, with Flair, Piper, and Green keeping the pace of the match. Flair ultimately applies a figure 4 leg lock on Scott Hall. Scott Hall ends up tapping out, and your winners of the match are Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, and Kevin Green. A couple of things I'm going to say about Slamboree 1997 before I get out of here, man. Number one, this was a decent event. A couple of matches on this card that I liked was Ultimo Dragon versus Steven Regal for the television championship. I mentioned this multiple times in the past as well. Steven Regal is severely underrated in pro wrestling, as well as Ultimo Dragon. That was a great match to open up Slamboree 1997. Luna Vachon versus Medusa was also a solid match. Glacier versus Mortis, again, was a decent matchup. Jared versus Malenko, decent as well. Ming versus Benoit was a solid match, with Ming coming out as, coming victorious in that matchup. Reggie White versus Steve McMichael was also a decent match, but the whole card came down to the main event, with Piper teaming up with Flair and Kevin Green versus the Outsiders in 6. This whole card was pretty much based off the main event for Slamboree 1997. But just like I do with every single one of these pay-per-views, I always give these pay-per-views a rating from 1 out of a 10. 1 being the worst, 10 being the best. I'm going to have to give Slamboree 1997 a solid 4, 4.5 at best. But this is my review of WCW Slamboree 1997. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classic. Peace.